Water came up faster than anyone said it would. That was the thing nobody talked about afterward. Not the rain, which had been going for 3 days, but the speed of it. The way the Rado backed up through the storm drains and turned the lower parking structure of the Centretown Medical Building into something that looked like the bottom of a canal. Rowan McAllister was on the second floor when it happened, finishing a calibration check on a ventilator that the respiratory team had flagged that morning. He heard the alarms before he felt anything. Then, he felt the floor vibrate. Then he went to the stairwell and looked down and saw the water already at the first landing, black and moving, carrying a plastic chair against the wall with a sound like someone knocking. He went down instead of up. There were 3 people on the ground floor who hadn't made it out. A custodian named Earl who had a bad knee and hadn't heard the evacuation notice over the floor buffer. A patient in a wheelchair who had been waiting for transport, and a woman in a gray blazer who had been in the records office when the power cut and the door had jammed in its frame. Rowan got Earl out first, then the patient, passing them to the paramedics who had set up at the top of the ramp. The woman in the blazer he found by sound. She was hitting the door with the flat of her palm in a steady rhythm, not panicking, just methodical, like someone who had decided that stopping was not an option. He shouldered the door twice before the frame gave. The water was a disguise by then. She grabbed the door frame and he put his arm across her back and they moved through it together. And by the time they reached the ramp, the water was at his waist, and she had stopped trying to hold the briefcase she'd been carrying and just held onto him instead. He left her with the paramedics. He didn't ask her name. She was conscious and breathing, and the paramedics had her, and that was the end of what he could do. He walked back to his truck in wet clothes and sat in the parking lot of the Tim Hortons on Bank Street and drank a medium coffee and ate a breakfast sandwich he didn't taste, and then drove to his daughter's school because it was 3:15 and she needed to be picked up. In his glove box, folded into quarters, was a letter from the Ontario College of Trades, his journeyman certification, the one he'd held for 11 years, the one that let him do the work he did, had been flagged for administrative review. The letter used the word irregularity 4 times. It did not explain what the irregularity was. Nora was 8. She had her mother's forehead and Rowan's habit of going quiet when something was bothering her, which meant that the car ride home was mostly her looking out the window at the flooded intersections and him watching the road and neither of them saying much. She had heard about the flood at school. 2 kids in her class had parents who worked downtown. "Were you there?" she said, "somewhere on the Queensway." "I was nearby." She looked at the wet patches still visible on his forearms where his jacket hadn't quite dried. "You went in?" He kept his eyes on the road. She went back to looking out the window and didn't ask anything else. This was something she had been doing more in the last 2 years, since Lee died, taking in information and filing it somewhere internal, returning to it later in ways that caught him off guard. She was not a child who needed things explained to her. She was a child who preferred to figure things out herself and then come to you when she was certain. He made dinner when they got home. Pasta with the sauce from the jar because it was a Tuesday, and Tuesdays were jar sauce. Nora did homework at the kitchen table. They ate without the television on. The second letter from the college arrived 4 days later. This one was not about an irregularity. This one informed him that pending resolution of the administrative review, his certification was suspended. Suspended meant he couldn't work. Couldn't work meant the contract at the medical building, the contract that was paying the mortgage on the house in Nepean where Nora had the room with the maple tree outside the window, was gone. He called the college's main line. He was on hold for 37 minutes. A woman named Sandra told him the review process typically took 60 to 90 days, and that he could request a formal hearing in writing. He asked what the irregularity was. She said she couldn't discuss the specifics of open files. He thanked her and hung up. That afternoon, he drove to the house of a man named Dave Prinkle, who had been his mentor in the trade and was now retired in Kanata with 2 retrievers and an opinion about everything. Dave read both letters at the kitchen table while the retrievers circled and resettled. "Someone filed a complaint," Dave said. He set the letters down and pushed them back across the table. "This language, irregularity in professional conduct, that's complaint language. That's not an audit. Someone reported you." Rowan looked at the letters. "For what?" Dave shook his head. He didn't know. But he knew someone at the college, a woman he'd worked with 20 years ago who was now on the certification board, and he said he'd make a call. He said it carefully, the way people say things when they want you to understand the call might not produce what you're hoping for. Rowan drove home through the October light. The maples along the side streets were past peak, dropping, the color mostly gone to brown. He picked Nora up from her after-school program at 5:15 and helped her with her reading and made grilled cheese for dinner and got her to bed by 8:30. Then he sat at the kitchen table with the letters in front of him and the window behind him showing the dark backyard in the shape of the maple against the sky. He was still sitting there at 11 when his phone buzzed. Unknown number, Toronto area code. He let it ring. It went to voicemail. He listened to it once. "Mr. McAllister, my name is Petra Voss. I believe you helped me out of the Centertown Medical Building last week. I'd like to speak with you when you have time. You can reach me at this number." The voice was even, not warm, not cold. The voice of someone who was used to leaving messages that got returned. He didn't call back that night. He looked up the name in the morning, sitting in the parking lot at the grocery store while Nora was in school. Petra Voss, 41, Toronto. Founder and managing partner of Voss Capital, a mid-sized private equity firm focused on healthcare infrastructure and municipal services. The photos showed a woman with dark hair and a composed expression in the kind of boardrooms that overlooked large bodies of water. There was a profile in the Globe from 2 years ago that described her as methodical, difficult to read, and someone who did not make decisions she hadn't already fully thought through. He called her back from the grocery store parking lot. She answered on the second ring. "Thank you for calling," she said. "You didn't have to find me." "No," she said. "I know that." A pause. He watched a woman load groceries into a minivan. Nora had asked for the cereal with the blue box again. He'd forgotten. "I'd like to know what you need," Petra said. "That's the whole reason for the call. There's no agenda beyond that." He told her he didn't need anything. She said that wasn't an answer. He said it was the only one he had. There was a silence on the line that didn't feel uncomfortable, which was strange. "All right," she said, "but I'm going to give you my direct number. If that changes, call it." He wrote it on the back of the grocery receipt and put it in the center console and went inside and forgot the cereal anyway. Petra Voss had been awake in her hotel room when her assistant Marcus texted her the name. She had been out of the hospital for 5 days, her left wrist still wrapped, the bruising on her ribs turning from purple to green. She had read the text and then sat on the edge of the bed in the dark for a while before she asked Marcus to pull everything. What he sent her an hour later was not what she expected. Rowan McAllister, 38, Nepean, Ontario. Journeyman biomedical equipment technician, 11 years. Certified through the Ontario College of Trades, Level 3, specialization in respiratory and critical care equipment. Employed by a service contractor out of Gloucester that held maintenance contracts with 4 Ottawa area hospitals. Wife deceased 2 years prior, 1 daughter, 8 years old. And then the second page. Administrative complaint filed against his certification 6 weeks ago by a man named Gregory Fitch, operations director of a competing firm called Medcore Technical Services. The complaint alleged that McAllister had performed out-of-scope maintenance on equipment that fell outside his certification level. Marcus had flagged the specific equipment referenced, a series of ventilator upgrades at the Centertown Medical Building, installed over the past year. Marcus had also flagged something else. Rowan McAllister had co-authored a technical maintenance protocol, a standards document published through the Canadian Standards Association 2 years ago, that specifically addressed the certification requirements for that class of ventilator. He had written the document. He had defined the scope, and Fitch's complaint was arguing that the work fell outside the scope that McAllister himself had established. Petra read the document twice. Then she called Marcus. "Medcore," she said. "They've been bidding on the Centertown contract," Marcus said, "and the Ottawa General contract. Both are up for renewal in the spring. McAllister's employer holds both." She looked at the ceiling of the hotel room. The HVAC was making a sound like something loose in the ductwork. "Has anyone challenged the complaint formally?" He filed for a hearing. The date hasn't been set. "Find out who sits on the certification board." She called her lawyer in Toronto at 7 in the morning. She called a contact she had at the College of Trades who she had worked with on a credentialing standards project 3 years ago. She asked the right questions and listened to the answers and wrote nothing down because she didn't need to. Then she booked a train to Ottawa. Rowan was replacing the fascia board on the north side of the house, one of 3 things on the exterior list he'd been working through since August when the taxi pulled up. He heard it and kept working. Then he heard the gate and set down the hammer. She was wearing a coat that was too light for October in Ottawa and holding her wrapped wrist slightly away from her body. She stopped at the bottom of the porch steps and looked up at him with the directness of someone who had decided in advance not to perform this interaction. "You didn't call ahead," he said. "I wasn't certain you'd be here." "I'm always here." He came down from the ladder. She looked at the house, the way people look at things they're genuinely trying to understand, not appraising, just taking it in. He had done most of the exterior work himself. The porch was new. The front window reframed, the trim painted the same color Lee had picked out 3 weeks before she got sick, a green dark enough to look almost black in the rain. The front door opened and Nora appeared in socks, looking at the woman at the bottom of the steps with the mild assessment of someone for whom strangers were not especially alarming. "You hurt your wrist," Nora said. "I did," Petra said. "My dad hurt his shoulder last year, but he didn't go to the doctor." Rowan looked at his daughter with the specific patience of a man who has surrendered certain arguments entirely. "Sondan one fleeves Zorano's sleeves," not quite a smile, the beginning of one. Rowan told her she didn't owe him anything. He said it without resentment, standing on the porch with his hands at his sides. He said it the way you say something you've already decided and don't intend to revisit. Then he held the door for Nora and let it close. Petra stood at the bottom of the steps. She could see, through the front window, the sheet of paper taped to the inside of the glass. The college letterhead, the certification suspension notice he'd put there 2 weeks ago and hadn't taken down, possibly because he had not yet decided what to do with the habit of looking at it. From here she couldn't read the words, but she recognized the layout. She had read that letter already. She knew exactly what it said. She stood there long enough that her driver, an older man named Frank who had been with her for 6 years, got out of the car and waited on the sidewalk, which was something Frank understood how to do. In her Toronto office 3 days later, Petra did not go to her regular morning meeting. She asked Marcus to send her the MedCorp Incorporation documents, the College of Trades complaint file as filed, and the CSA Standards archive going back 4 years. She ate half a sandwich and read until 6 in the evening and then called her lawyer again. "The complaint is procedurally defective," her lawyer said. She had reached the same conclusion herself but wanted confirmation. Fitch cited Section 14C of the college's conduct guidelines, but that section was superseded by an amendment in 2022. The amendment is footnoted in the CSA document that McAllister co-authored. Fitch either didn't know or didn't care. "Which one?" Petra said. "Does it matter?" She thought about it. Not really. She called Marcus next. "I need everything on MedCorp's current contract position. Every active bid, every renewal timeline, every hospital they're targeting." Marcus was quiet for a moment. "This is going to look like something." "It is something," Petra said. "Pull it anyway." What he sent her looked exactly like what she'd suspected. MedCorp had been systematically underbidding on contracts in the Ottawa-Kingston corridor for 18 months, losing money on each one, positioning for a portfolio that would make them the dominant regional provider before any of the individual hospitals understood what was happening. The complaint against Rowan was timed to the Centretown renewal. If his certification was suspended during the renewal window, his employer's contract was vulnerable. If the contract went to MedCorp, the pattern locked in. She also found something else. A safety incident report filed with Health Canada 18 months ago. A MedCorp technician had performed a calibration procedure on a dialysis unit at a Kingston hospital using a protocol that had been flagged as outdated in the CSA Standards update. The update had been co-authored by Rowan McAllister. MedCorp had received the update. The incident had resulted in a patient requiring additional treatment for 2 days. There had been no formal investigation. The report had been filed and acknowledged and assigned a tracking number, and nothing further had happened. Petra read the incident report 3 times. Then she sat very still in her office for a while. Her phone rang. Marcus. I found something else, he said. The college's certification board. One of the 5 members is a former MedCorps executive. He left the company 8 months ago. He's been on the board for 4. Outside the office window, Toronto was doing what Toronto did in November, gray and relentless. The lake, somewhere behind the buildings, pressing its cold weight against the city. She looked at it for a moment. Sawdust on cuff, with legal for tomorrow morning, she said, and find out who at Health Canada handles the incident tracking file. On the same afternoon, 450 kilometers east in Compan, Rowan McAllister sat across a desk from a woman named Linda Ashe, who was the college's hearing officer and who had the careful manner of someone who had delivered a great deal of bad news and had learned to do it in a tone that neither apologized nor explained itself. The hearing date had been set for March, 5 months away. His suspension would remain in effect until then. He could apply for a temporary reinstatement on hardship grounds, Linda said, but the process typically took 6 to 8 weeks and was not guaranteed. He asked what the irregularity in his professional conduct was specifically alleged to be. She said she could direct him to the complaint document. He said he had read the complaint document. She said she understood. He thanked her and stood up. He sat in the truck in the parking lot of the college building on Bay Street. It was a building he had visited twice before, once to file his Level 3 certification, once to add the specialization. He had been proud of both. Not in a way he talked about, but in the way you're proud of something that cost you real time and real effort and proved something you needed to know about yourself. He looked at the building for a long time. Then he drove to the school to get Nora. That evening his phone rang at 9:40, Toronto area code. "Did you know about the MedCorps bid on your contract?" Petra said. He was quiet for a moment. "Yes." "And the timing of the complaint?" "I assumed." Fitch cited a superseded guideline, she said. Her voice was the same as on the train platform, even no performance. "The section he used hasn't been in effect since 2022. It's in a footnote in the CSA document you wrote." 4 seconds. He looked at the kitchen table. "How do you know what I wrote?" he said. "I read it." He said nothing. "The board member with the conflict," she said. "I've also found the Health Canada file. Kingston, 18 months ago." He knew which file. He had heard about the Kingston incident through the network of techs who talks to each other the way people in any trade talk, carefully, without putting names to things, but knowing what was meant. He had known what it meant about MedCorps protocols. He had known for a year. "You could file a formal complaint," Petra said, "against Fish, against the board member, against MedCorps' Health Canada file. The liability exposure on all 3 is significant, and with your standing as the author of the standards document, your credibility on the technical questions is unimpeachable." He was quiet. "You already knew that," she said. "Yes." The line was quiet, not the silence of a dropped call, the silence of someone waiting for something to follow something else. "Why didn't you?" she said. He looked at the window. The maple in the backyard was a dark shape against a slightly less dark sky. "Because Nora needs me at school pickup," he said. "Because a formal complaint takes 2 years and costs $20,000 and I don't have either. Because I thought maybe it would just resolve." "It won't resolve." "I know that now." She didn't say anything for a moment. Then, "I'm going to make some calls tomorrow. I'm telling you in advance this time. I thought you should know what I'm doing before I do it." He didn't say yes. He didn't say no. He said he appreciated the call and hung up. He sat at the table for a while. Then he got out Nora's school bag and checked her homework folder the way he did every night, and there was a drawing she'd made in art class. A house with a big tree beside it and 2 figures in front of it, and above the house, in careful 8-year-old printing, "Our House." He put it on the refrigerator with the magnet shaped like a beaver that had been there since before Lee died, and he stood in front of it for longer than he needed to. When Petra made the calls, she made them herself. She did not send Marcus. She called the chair of the Ontario College of Trades Certification Board, a woman she had met once at a standards conference in Calgary, and she laid out the conflict of interest situation with the board member in the specific and unornamented way she laid out all problems that required clarity over tact. She called her contact at Health Canada and sent him the Kingston file and the MedCorps protocol documentation. She called a journalist at the Star she had worked with on a healthcare accountability piece 2 years ago and gave her nothing on the record and everything she needed to start asking questions. Then she called her lawyer and asked him to file a formal third-party challenge to the certification complaint on procedural grounds. Marcus knocked on her office door at 4 in the afternoon. She was on her second call of the day with the CSA. "This is going to be noticed," he said when she was off. "Yes. Medcorps is going to know it's connected." "I know." He stood in the doorway for a moment. Marcus had worked for her for 7 years and had learned to read the difference between a business decision and something that was organized around different principles. He had held that knowledge quietly across a lot of different situations. "Petra," he said. She looked up. "Make sure you know why you're doing this." She looked at him for a moment. Then she went back to the document on her screen and didn't answer, which was itself an answer of a kind. The second time she came to Nepean, she called ahead. He answered. She told him she would be there Saturday afternoon, and he said all right. He was in the backyard splitting wood when she arrived, the stack against the fence already taller than when she'd been here before. He heard the car and came around the side of the house, and she was at the gate. The wrist strap was off. She moved without the careful economy of someone managing pain, which meant it had healed, or she had decided not to show it. Nora was on the back step with a piece of scrap wood and a small carving tool she'd been working with since September. She looked up when Petra came through, gave her a wave with the hand that wasn't holding the tool, and went back to the wood. It was the wave of someone greeting a person they had already made a decision about. Rowan made coffee. They sat at the kitchen table with the documents between them. The formal challenge filing, the Health Canada correspondence, the college's interim notice suspending the complaint pending procedural review. He read them the way he read technical documents, looking for the structural thing first and then going back for detail. He looked up. The board member recused himself voluntarily, Peter said, yesterday. And the Health Canada file. Open investigation, they'll contact you as the standard's author. He sat back. He looked at the documents on the table. You did all of this without asking me. Most of it, she said. I told you I was going to make calls. That's not the same as asking. No, she said. It isn't. The sound of Nora's carving tool on the back step. The furnace clicking on. Outside the kitchen window, the maple stood bare and patient against the November sky. I'm not comfortable with this, he said. I know. I don't mean the help. He said it carefully. I mean the part where I don't know what this is. She was quiet for a moment. Neither do I, she said. And she said it in the tone of someone who was being exact rather than evasive. He looked at her. She looked back. It was the first time in any of their conversations that neither of them had a document to refer to. Nora appeared in the back doorway holding her carving, which was a small animal of some kind. A fox maybe, or a dog, the ears still rough. She held it up. What do you think? She said to both of them. Good ears, Petra said. Nora considered this seriously. They're not done yet. She went back outside. Rowan watched her go. Then he refilled Petra's coffee without asking, which was the first thing he had done in either of her visits that wasn't in response to something. The college's interim decision came in writing on a Wednesday in early December. The procedural challenge had been upheld. The complaint against Rowan McAllister's certification was dismissed pending a full review of the filing. His certification was reinstated, effective immediately. The full review, the letter said, would examine the procedural conduct of the complaint process and the composition of the panel. He read it at the kitchen table at 6 in the morning before Nora came downstairs. He set it down. He got up and made coffee. He stood at the counter with his back to the letter for a while. When Nora came down, she saw the letter, read the first paragraph, looked at her father's back. She sat down. She poured cereal. She didn't say anything, and neither did he, and that was how they handled the things that were actually important. He called Petra that evening. She was in her apartment in Toronto. He could hear the city through the phone, a siren somewhere, the particular density of sound that cities have at night. I got the letter, he said. I know. The college called me as the filing party. A pause. I need to ask you something. All right. The Medcorps situation, he said. Did you have a business interest in any of that? In the contracts, in the outcome. She was quiet for a moment, not the silence of someone choosing words, the silence of someone who had already chosen them and was deciding whether the timing was right. No, she said, I don't have any position in Ottawa healthcare contracting. But you could. I could, she said. That's a different question. He looked at the kitchen. Nora's drawing was still on the refrigerator. The beaver magnet. The green paint on the window frame he'd matched to the color Lee had picked. Why did you do it? He said. 3 seconds. The city sound through the phone. Because it was wrong, she said. That's the real reason. The first reason. You said first. She didn't respond immediately. The pause lasted long enough that it became its own kind of answer. I should let you go, he said. Nora's still up. Rowan. He waited. There's a standards working group at the CSA. They're updating the respiratory equipment protocol. They want the original author on the committee. I forwarded your name. You'll hear from them in January. He was quiet for a moment. You could have asked me. I could have, she said. I'll work on that. The call lasted another 40 minutes. He couldn't have said afterward what most of it was about. Not the college, not MedCorps, not the working group. It was two people talking past the point where there was anything left to settle, which is a different thing entirely. Gregory Fitch resigned from MedCorps Technical Services in January. The Health Canada investigation into the Kingston incident resulted in a formal corrective action order requiring MedCorps to audit and update their calibration protocols across all active contracts. The audit was conducted by an independent technical reviewer. The reviewer's report cited the CSA standard as the correct benchmark. The standard's listed author was Rowan McAllister. The certification board's internal review concluded in February. Its findings were not public, but the board member who had been a former MedCorps executive did not stand for reappointment when his term ended in March. Petra came to Nepean in April, on a Saturday, without a reason. There were no documents this time. She had told him she was coming and he had said, all right, the same way he'd said it before, with the same composure that she had come to understand was not indifference but something more like steadiness. He was in the backyard when she arrived. The maple had gone from bare to budded, the first leaves not yet open, just present, a green that was barely green. Nora was on the back step with her carving, which had progressed over the winter from a rough fox shape into something more considered, the fur indicated in small deliberate cuts. Petra sat on the step beside her. Nora showed her the underside of the carving, where the detail work was most complete. That's the hardest part, Nora said. Nobody sees it, but it has to be right. Yes, Petra said. It does. Rowan came over from the far end of the yard where he'd been working on the fence and sat on the top step with his coffee. The three of them were quiet in the April light. The maple budded above the step. A chickadee moved through the branches and was gone. I'm going to add a window, Rowan said after a while. He said it to no one in particular, looking at the back wall of the house, south-facing, better light in the afternoons. Nora looked up from her carving. Mom wanted to do that. I know. Nora looked at the wall, then at her carving, then went back to work. Her knife made a small clean sound in the morning, quiet. Petra looked at the back wall of the house. Then she looked at him. He was looking at the wall with the expression of someone who has made a decision after a long time of not making it. Her phone buzzed in her coat pocket. She looked at the screen, Marcus, and turned it face down on the step without answering. He had seen. He didn't say anything. He moved his coffee to the other hand. On the step between them, in the space that was not quite touching and not quite not, the April light moved the way it does in Ontario in the first week of the month, slow and without urgency, and longer than you remembered it being. Nora finished the underside of the carving and turned it over to look at the face. The fox looked back at her, patient and complete, the detail work finally meeting the surface. She set it on her knee. It's done, she said. Nobody told her it was good. It didn't need to be said. She set it on the step beside her and picked up her mug, and the three of them sat in the yard while the maple opened, leaf by leaf, into the long, unhurried fact of spring. I keep thinking about the moment Rowan stood in that parking lot outside the college building, looking at the door he'd walked through twice before, once proud, once hollow, and drove home anyway to pick up his daughter from school. He didn't make a scene. He didn't post anything. He just went and got Nora and made grilled cheese and checked her homework folder like it was any other Tuesday. That's the part that stays with me. There's a version of this story where Rowan is the kind of man who fights loudly, who calls a journalist himself, who knows how to turn his situation into leverage. He isn't that man. What he is someone who showed up in a flooded stairwell without thinking about it. Not because he calculated the risk, but because 3 people needed help and he was there, and he knew how to move through water. That's not a small thing. That's actually the whole thing. The way we act when there's no one watching and nothing to gain is the truest version of who we are. And Rowan had already shown that version of himself long before Petra ever came to his door. I think about what it costs to do what's right and not be recognized for it. Rowan co-authored the safety standard that MedCorp violated. He filed the warning internally. He resigned from nothing. He just kept working, kept calibrating ventilators, kept picking Nora up at 3:15, and then someone used the document he wrote to file a complaint against him. That's not bad luck. That's what happens when integrity doesn't come with institutional protection, knowing what's right and acting on it anyway, even when the system turns that knowledge against you. That's a kind of moral toughness that doesn't get talked about enough. It's quiet, and it's grinding, and most people never see it. Petra saw it, not because she was looking for a cause, but because she's the kind of person who reads things carefully and follows what the evidence actually says. She found the superseded guideline. She found the Health Canada file. She found the board members' conflict. She did all of that in her own time, with her own resources, and she told Rowan in advance what she was going to do, not to ask permission, but because she'd decided that was the right way to treat someone. That distinction matters. Intelligence without that kind of ethical grounding is just a tool. She had both, and she used them together. What I keep returning to is Nora. 8 years old, carving a fox on the back step, making sure the underside is right even though nobody will see it. She said it herself, it has to be right. She learned that from somewhere. She learned it from a father who went back into a flooded building, who didn't stop at one person, who drove home afterward and didn't tell anyone. Children learn what they live with, and what Nora lived with was a man who didn't quit and didn't perform and didn't wait for the world to notice him doing the right thing. The causes and effects in this story aren't complicated, even if they took time to work themselves out. One act of genuine decency sets something in motion that neither person could have planned. But I don't think it works unless both of them were already the people they turned out to be. One willing to act without reward and one willing to use her capability in service of something beyond her own interests. That combination isn't fate. It's just what happens when character meets character, and the timing is right. The window Rowan was planning to add to the south wall of the house, the one his late wife had wanted. He started drawing it again in April. Not because anything was fixed exactly, but because something had shifted enough that he could imagine the light coming through it. Sometimes that's what getting through something looks like, not triumph. Just the quiet return of the ability to plan ahead.